Hello everyone and welcome to today's session, where you will learn how you can implement centralized monitoring for your Qlik SaaS customer instances. First, we will have a brief look at what core Qlik Cloud monitoring applications exist and what the OEM dashboard is. Then we'll dive into the setup process of all those Qlik apps in a multi-tenant environment. At the end of the slide deck, you will find additional information regarding today's topic, for example, where to download all those apps. And then finally, we will move on to the Q&A and try to answer as many of your questions as possible. Let's start with a look at the core monitoring apps for Qlik Cloud. There are three worth mentioning. The App Analyzer provides insights on the Qlik apps that you have deployed inside a tenant. It will help you to monitor the app's memory footprint, optimize the data models, and much more. The Entitlement Analyzer will help you to track the entitlement usage across a tenant. For example, what's the distribution of analyzer or professional entitlements, how much of my analyzer capacity has been used, or how are the users actually using the system. And then there's the Reload Analyzer, which will provide information on the app reloads, like the date and time of reloads, the number of reloads, were there any failed reloads, but also how the data connections are used. So what is the OEM dashboard? It offers a single pane view on the most important data across all your tenants by combining the App Analyzer, Reload Analyzer, and Entitlement Analyzer into one single model. And this is done by loading the data from all those core monitoring apps across all tenants into the OEM dashboard. So before moving on to the setup process, let's have a quick look at what the OEM dashboard looks like. So here I'm in the hub of my tenant from which I want to monitor all my customers' tenant. As you can see, I've also got the core monitoring apps running on this machine. And here we've got the OEM dashboard. So let's open that up. Takes a while to load. As you can see, the OEM dashboard only consists of two sheets. There's the dashboard itself and there's the metadata sheet. I'll walk you through them just now. So the dashboard is basically your single view across all the tenants which you have connected to the monitoring system. As you can see here, I've got two child tenants connected from which I collect data on a regular basis. And it's presented in a tabular form, and I got some kind of key metrics like the number of apps per tenant, users consuming apps, number of sessions, reloads. So I got a lot of information in one single view. By moving on to another tab in here, I can also see the license information across my entire multi-tenant system. And I can break that down also by tenant. So I see how many professional entitlements I've assigned and so on. Can also go down to the user level now to see how many apps a user is using, how many sessions a user has been created, what his average session time was, and move all along going through these down to the apps, see how many apps there are, which spaces they are assigned to, how many users are consuming those apps, when have they been consumed for the last time, then the reloads. As you can see here in this one, I've had a fair number of failed reloads in the past few days. And this can then help me to increase the health of my entire system. Also got a dashboard where I can view the average reload duration by app and also get a detailed view on reload tasks by application itself. So this is the main control center to monitor your customers' tenants. And now moving on to the second tab, the metadata one. This is providing more information on the health of the monitoring data which has been collected. So you see here, there are no stale parent QVDs. No tenants require attention, so all the tenants are collecting data as they should. And down here, I also see information on what time the data was last collected, how old it is, and if there was any trouble going on here, I could move then to the child tenant and fix it. If, for example, you want to dive deeper into one of the areas, like let's say the reloads, you can still go back to the core monitoring apps on your parent tenant. So let's open the reload analyzer, and then these apps will provide you a more detailed view on the data which has been collected from the various tenants. So this is an accumulated view, but you can, by selecting up here, you can narrow it down to one of the tenants that you have connected to the monitoring. Now let's have a look at the setup process and some of the prerequisites you have to take care of. First, download the core monitoring apps as well as the dashboard from the Qlik community website. Just follow the download link on this slide. Also be aware of that all the apps are provided as is and are not officially supported by Qlik support. Then you need to configure a centralized cloud storage to allow an exchange of information across all tenants. Currently, Amazon S3, Google Cloud Storage, and Azure Storage have been tested to work with this. Before we move on, we have to clarify the usage of the terms child tenant and parent tenant. As generally all tenants provisioned with a multi-tenancy Qlik Cloud license are equal in functionality, we will refer to those tenants used by the OEM partner itself as the parent tenants, and those used by the OEM partner's clients to consume apps provided by the OEM partner as child tenants. The setup process can be broken down as follows between child tenant and parent tenant. First, upload the core monitoring apps. On the parent tenant, you also need to upload the OEM dashboard. Then create a connection to the central cloud file storage. For each tenant, enable API access and generate an API key. Then create a connection to the tenant's REST API, which will allow you to connect the monitoring data. Inside each app, you will have to configure the connection to the cloud storage, also to the REST API, and also the run mode. We will walk through this in the next slide. And then last but not least, you have to ensure that all the apps get reloaded frequently to keep the data up to date. So you need to schedule the app reloads. Now let's have a look at what's happening on a child tenant level and how it needs to be configured. Each monitoring app will collect its relevant data through the configured REST API and store it as QVDs to the centralized file storage. Therefore, each monitoring app needs to be configured to run in child mode. Let's have a closer look at the app configuration inside the load script itself. The first parameter which we have to configure is the qualified domain name of the tenant. Then we need to configure the REST connection through which the monitoring data is collected, as well as the connection to the centralized cloud file storage. As a recommendation, it's good to add for example, a tenant alias or a tenant name to the end of the connection string. So the data is stored in a subfolder. We also have to ensure that the app is running in multi-tenant mode. So we need to set multi-tenant enabled to 1. And on the child tenant, we have to make sure that it's running in child mode, which equals setting is parent app to 0. And then last but not least, again, we have to point to the centralized cloud storage where the data will be stored to. Now let's see what's happening on the parent tenant level. Since the core monitoring apps are running in parent mode, they will not collect any data from the tenant itself, but instead load the data collected from each child tenant, which has been stored in the centralized file storage, then stack the models, perform some transformations, and store the composite models as QVDs into the compiled tenants folder of the centralized file storage. On the configuration side, pretty much all stays the same. We still have to ensure that we have multi-tenant enabled, but this time is parent app is set to 1. So this app is running in parent mode and storing its data centrally. Then finally, the OEM dashboard app will only load the QVDs from the compiled tenant folder of the centralized file storage and present it in the charts in the dashboards. On the configuration side, the only thing we need to change is basically pointing to the centralized file storage to their main directory. This diagram just gives again a single overview over the 3 steps we just walked through. So here in the middle, you've got your customer tenants or child tenants, which collect individual QED files on a tenant level and store them to the centralized file storage. Then we've got the OEM, the core monitoring apps on the parent tenant, which read the tenant's information from the core monitoring app and produce some compiled QVDs. And then the OEM dashboard just reads the compiled information from the compiled tenants directory. Let's have a quick look on how this looks like from the folder structure. So when everything is configured correctly, this is how it could look like. Here I've got my child tenant 1, my child tenant 2, where the core monitoring apps are storing its data. And then I've got my Qlik meta collection directory, where I have also some subdirectories for each tenant, here with the tenant ID, where each app is storing its data, and the OEM, the core monitoring apps running in parent mode will then store them in the compiled tenant directory. One last word about scheduling. Data freshness inside the OEM dashboard can only be ensured if the monitoring apps on all the child tenants are reloaded regularly. So defining a reload schedule for each app individually is possible, like you know it from the hub, but it will become hard to maintain with a growing number of child tenants and apps. So one solution out of that could be to use application automation and some building blocks in there that allow you to either reload several apps in parallel or sequentially, and basically handle everything in one go. And once such an automation has been set up for one child tenant, it can also be easily transferred to another tenant and reconfigured. All the resources relevant to this presentation are available on the Qlik community page. So the first link will point you to a summary page on all monitoring apps that are available, including the subpages. And the second link will take you directly to the OEM dashboard, which comes with an introduction video, the app to download, and a configuration guide. And there's also a blog post on the topic of multi-tenancy, including the monitoring.